Imagine waking up one day with no rules, no obligations, no ties, nothing binding you to any person, job, belief, or place. No one to disappoint, no deadlines to meet, no identity to uphold. At first, it feels exhilarating, like stepping out of a cage you didn't even realize you were in. You are free, truly free. But as the hours pass, an unsettling weight begins to settle on your chest. You notice how the silence stretches longer than it should, how the stillness feels less like peace and more like an endless echo. There's no one to tell you what to do, yet you find yourself paralyzed. No path, no purpose, no meaning, but the one you create. And that's when the truth hits you. This freedom you've always dreamed of isn't a gift. It's a burden, isn't? It's strange. We spend our entire lives craving freedom from parents, from bosses, from rules, from the invisible chains of society, and yet, when we finally taste it, when we realize that we are ultimately free to make our lives whatever we want them to be, it feels crushing. Why? If you were truly free, completely unshackled from all external expectations, what would you do? Do you even know? Or would you, like so many before you, stumble into a new prison of your own making habits? Distractions, familiar routines, because absolute freedom terrifies you. We romanticize freedom as the ultimate human ideal. I think it means liberation, empowerment, the chance to live authentically. But what if that's a lie we tell ourselves? What if true freedom isn't about bliss, but about unbearable responsibility? Because when no one is holding the reins, the only person left to blame for the shape of your life is you. And deep down, isn't that what scares you most? Consider this. Every choice you make closes an infinite number of doors. Every yes to one path is a no to countless others. And when you truly accept that nothing is stopping you, not your parents, not society, not circumstance, you begin to see that you alone are responsible for the life you lead. That realization is suffocating. Perhaps this is why so many cling to authority, religion, tradition, even toxic relationships. Because having someone or something telling you who to be, what to do, and how to live is easier than facing the terrifying question: if I am truly free, then what do I do with myself? This is the paradox at the heart of human existence. We claim to want freedom, yet when it arrives, it feels unbearable. We want to define our lives, yet we fear the weight of that power. We long for autonomy, yet we find comfort in being told what to do. What if that's why we invent rules, systems, and hierarchies? Not because we need them, but because we need to be saved from ourselves. Look closely at your own life. Of your choices are truly yours? Your career, did you choose it because it was your calling or because it was safe? Your relationships, did you build them out of genuine connection or because they offered you stability? Your beliefs, are they the result of deep contemplation or simply the ones handed down to you? If you strip all that away, what remains? That's the unsettling reality of true freedom. It doesn't feel like soaring. It feels like standing naked in front of an infinite abyss, knowing that no one is coming to tell you which way to go, and yet somewhere deep inside, a small, persistent voice whispers, this is what being alive really means. This is the great question we rarely ask ourselves. If you could be anyone, do anything, live in any way without rules or limitations, what would you choose? And if you don't know the answer, then maybe freedom isn't the blissful dream you thought it was. Maybe it's the heaviest burden a human being can carry. Perhaps that's why so many of us run from it into conformity, into routine, into the safe illusion that our lives are prescripted. Because it's easier to say I had no choice than to admit I chose this. And that's where our journey begins. Because understanding the burden of being truly free requires us to dig deeper than we've ever dared. To question the very foundations of our lives. To confront the uncomfortable truth that, in the end, we are the authors of our existence, whether we like it or not. But why does this feel so unbearable? Why does this truth haunt us more than it liberates us? To answer that, we need to peel back the layers of our psychology, our philosophy, and our history. And when we do, we'll discover that this isn't just about freedom. It's about the very core of what it means to be human. So why does freedom, the very thing we claim to crave, often feel like a chain around our necks instead of wings on our back? To answer that, we need to descend into the shadowed corridors of our own minds, where the roots of this paradox twist and tangle. Consider the words of Jean-Paul Sartre, who declared man is condemned to be free. At first glance, it sounds poetic. But what did he really mean? Condemned, not gifted, not blessed. Sartre recognized that freedom is not the dreamy liberation we imagine. It is a relentless, inescapable truth. You cannot run from the fact that you are responsible for everything you do or fail to do. This is the existential weight pressing down on you every time you lie awake at night, wondering if you're wasting your one brief life. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche saw it too. He believed that most people don't truly want freedom, they want comfort. They want the familiar, the secure, the dull rhythm of the herd. Real freedom, Nietzsche said, belongs only to the higher man, the one willing to bear the terror of standing alone, defining his own values in a godless, indifferent universe. Everyone else, they gladly trade autonomy for the soothing lullaby of conformity. And then there's Carl Jung, who confronted a different side of the problem. Jung believed that most of us wear masks, what he called the persona, to survive. In society, we convince ourselves that these masks are who we really are, and in doing so, we silence the deeper, wilder self inside us. The self with a capital S. Freedom threatens this delicate balance. If we strip off the mask, who are we really? Are we even prepared to meet that version of ourselves? Here's the psychological root of the problem. True freedom shatters the illusion that someone else, your boss, your parents, your culture, even God, is ultimately in control. It throws you into what Viktor Frankl called the existential vacuum, that terrifying space where you realize no one is going to hand you a purpose. You must create it yourself. So what could be more paralyzing than that? Think of how society trains you from birth. You're taught what's normal, what's right, what you're supposed to do. These lessons become invisible bars on the cage you call life. Go to school, get a job, buy a house, start a family, stay productive, keep the machine running. If you follow the script, you get applause. Deviate, and you face exile. This conditioning seeps so deeply into your psyche that even when the bars are gone, when no one is watching, you still feel them. This is what psychologists call introjection. You internalize external rules until they feel like your own thoughts. So even when you break free, you're often still living someone else's life, mistaking borrowed dreams for your own. And then there's the shadow side of freedom, the one Aldous Huxley warned about. When you remove all constraints, when you strip away authority, you don't necessarily... If you've ever had a sudden, unexplainable rush of dread in the middle of an otherwise normal day, that's what it is. If you've ever felt a wave of grief for no clear reason, grief for something you can't name, it might be this. The mourning of a life unlived, and it's here in this quiet grief the real consequences of avoiding freedom reveal themselves, because this isn't just about your job or your relationships. This is about the very essence of being human. To live without embracing freedom is to betray yourself. To settle for less than full responsibility is to surrender the one thing that makes you more than an animal, the ability to consciously shape your existence. But if this burden is so heavy, if its avoidance costs us so much, how do we ever learn to carry it? That's where rebellion begins. Not rebellion against society, but rebellion against the lie that you are powerless. And it is too that rebellion, the terrifying, liberating act of reclaiming your autonomy, that we now turn. If you've made it this far, you've already done what most people never do. You've stared the burden of freedom in the face. You've admitted what so many suppress, that freedom is not an endless festival of choices, but a solemn, weighty charge. And now comes the hardest part. What do you do with this knowledge? The first step in rebellion is this. You must reject the comforting illusion that someone else will rescue you. No mentor, no guru, no government, no divine decree will hand you a ready-made purpose. If you're waiting for permission to live fully, you will wait forever. This is the first great act of rebellion, to take ownership of your existence without conditions. Viktor Frankl, who endured the horrors of the concentration camps, discovered this truth in the bleakest of circumstances. No matter what is stripped away from you, you retain the freedom to choose your response. You cannot always control your environment, but you can decide who you will be within it. And that, Frankl insisted, is where meaning begins, not in the absence of suffering, but in how you bear it. Rebellion also means dismantling the masks you've been wearing. Jung warned that our persona, the polished, socially acceptable version of ourselves, can become a prison if we mistake it for our true identity. To break free, you must confront the parts of yourself you've exiled, the unfulfilled dreams, the buried desires, the wild, untamed voice you've silenced for the sake of being acceptable. This is not a comfortable process. It feels like peeling away your skin. But if you don't do it, you'll never meet the self that lies beneath the persona. And then, once you strip away those false identities, you must build something new, not by default, but by design. Nietzsche called this the task of the Bermensch, to create your own values, to write your own commandments, to become an artist of your own existence. He wasn't talking about wealth or fame or power. He was talking about the rarest kind of freedom, the courage to live by principles you have chosen, not inherited. How do you do this? You start by asking better questions. Not what do others expect of me, but what would I do if I weren't afraid of failing? Not what's the safe choice, but what would make my life feel worth living, even if it cost me everything? These questions are dangerous. They dismantle the scaffolding you've built around your life. But in their danger lies your salvation. And here's where the rebellion deepens. You must learn to carry the terror of choice without running from it. Sartre was right, freedom is nauseating. It's dizzying. But like standing at the edge of a great cliff, the fear you feel is not a sign you should step back. It's an invitation to leap. This leap doesn't mean you throw away all structure. Ironically, to wield freedom effectively, you need self-imposed boundaries. But here's the difference. These boundaries are chosen, not inherited. They exist to serve your deepest values, not to suppress them. Frankl found meaning in service to others. Nietzsche found it in creative self-overcoming. Your rebellion will be your own, but it must be deliberate, and you don't need to do this on a grand scale. Rebellion doesn't always mean quitting your job, selling your possessions, or moving to a cabin in the woods. Sometimes, the greatest rebellion is simply saying no to the scripts that keep you small. It's walking away from a relationship that deadens your soul. It's pursuing the art, the business, the study you've been too scared to attempt. It's waking up and deciding that today, you will no longer live as a ghost in your own life. But here's the most radical part. Rebellion requires you to embrace suffering, not avoid it. The philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer argued that life is, by nature, full of pain, and the attempt to escape that pain only deepens it. Freedom means facing suffering head-on and using it as raw material for growth. As Nietzsche put it, to live is to suffer. To survive is to find some meaning in the suffering. That meaning doesn't arrive fully formed. You must forge it. And forging meaning is hard. It means living in alignment with values you've defined, even when no one applauds you. It means tolerating uncertainty, taking risks that might end in failure, and bearing the isolation of walking a path others won't understand. This is why so few choose rebellion. It's easier to keep the mask on. It's easier to numb yourself with entertainment. It's easier to outsource your choices to tradition, culture, or authority. But if you do that, you'll never know the unshakable strength that comes from living as the author of your own life. And make no mistake, this is the point of rebellion. Not to reject everything for the sake of chaos, but to claim ownership of the one thing no one else can live for your existence. So what does breaking free look like in practice? It might look like journaling your values and aligning your decisions with them, no matter how small. It might look like creating rituals that anchor you in your purpose. It might mean leaving behind the old narratives that kept you trapped and daring to rewrite the story of who you are. And as you do this, you will feel a shift. The nausea of freedom doesn't go away, but it transforms. It becomes a quiet exhilaration, a recognition that, while life will never be free of suffering, it can be full of meaning. Rebellion isn't about running from the burden of freedom. It's about carrying it with strength and grace. But once you've learned to rebel, once you've reclaimed your autonomy, one question remains the most powerful question of all. What is the ultimate purpose of this freedom? That, my friend, leads us to the deepest layer of all, the final, most profound realization. What is freedom for? That is the question most people never dare to ask. They stop at the surface, treating freedom as an end in itself, a vague idea of doing whatever I want. But the longer you carry the burden of being truly free, the more you realize this. Freedom without direction is indistinguishable from chaos. And chaos, if left unchecked, swallows you whole. This is the final, most difficult truth. Freedom is not the destination. 'Tis the beginning. You see, when you strip away the rules, the scripts, the illusions of safety, when you stand naked before life with no external authority to guide you, you are left with a blank canvas. And that canvas is terrifying. But it's also the most sacred thing you will ever touch, because it is here, in this empty space, that you are called to create. This is the ultimate realization. Freedom isn't about escaping constraints. It's about transforming them. It's about taking the raw material of your existence, your pain, your limitations, our mortality, and shaping them into something that reflects the truth of who you are. Get meaning or fulfillment. Often, you get chaos. You get people anesthetizing themselves with pleasure, numbing themselves with distractions, filling the void with noise because silence is unbearable. You've seen it, the endless scrolling, the compulsive buying, the way we chase stimulation to avoid the raw confrontation with ourselves. In truth, most of us don't want freedom. We want escape from our guilt, our uncertainty, our mortality. We cling to systems, religions, governments, corporate ladders, not because they free us, but because they protect us from the dizzying abyss of choice. But here's the cruel twist. Even if you reject all of that, even if you tear down the systems and live by your own rules, you cannot escape yourself. And in that silence, you will hear the most haunting question echoing back. If I am truly free, what is my life worth? This is why so many people unconsciously self-sabotage their freedom. They take soul-killing jobs, enter suffocating relationships, or cling to rigid belief systems. These constraints give them something to push against, someone to blame, a story to tell themselves. Because standing naked in front of an uncaring universe, holding the pen to write your own story, that's a responsibility most can't bear. This is why Sartre described freedom as nausea, why Nietzsche said it demands the courage to become a creator of values, why Frankl argued that freedom without meaning becomes despair, why Jung warned that the unexamined self left unchecked can lead us into madness. This hidden problem, this psychological and philosophical burden, that freedom doesn't just liberate us. It forces us to confront who we really are beneath the masks, to own our choices fully, and to create meaning where none is given. And for many, that's too much. This is why you see people who seem free, wealthy, unbound, untethered still, living in quiet misery. It's why some who win the lottery end up more broken than before. It's why those who drop out of the system often find themselves pulled back into new forms of captivity, whether it's addiction, ideology, or another hierarchy. Because here's the truth no one wants to say out loud. Freedom doesn't make you happy. It makes you responsible. And most of us, if we're honest, don't want that. But until you face this reality, until you understand this hidden root, you will remain trapped, whether inside the system or outside of it. The question now becomes, what happens when we don't face it? If freedom is this heavy, if it's this unbearable, how does it shape our lives without us even realizing it? What unseen forces are we caught in because we refuse to carry the burden? That is where our journey turns next, into the shadowed terrain of the unseen consequences, where the cost of avoiding true freedom reveals itself in ways far darker than we dare admit. The tragedy of avoiding true freedom is that you don't just lose the right to shape your life, you lose yourself without even knowing it. When you refuse to carry the burden of freedom, when you outsource the weight of choice to systems, authority, or circumstance, you slowly become something less than fully human. And yet, paradoxically, this is the path most people take. Not out of malice, not even out of ignorance, but because it feels safer than staring into the abyss of their own autonomy. Look around. You'll see the silent cost of this evasion. Everywhere. It's in the glazed eyes of the commuter who's been riding the same train to the same office for 20 years, telling himself it's what a responsible adult does. It's in the half-hearted laughter at dinner parties, where people defend careers they despise, marriages that suffocate them, and routines that have long since drained them of vitality. It's in the endless stream of distractions, the mindless. Scrolling, the compulsive shopping, the binge-watching of lives more interesting than their own. Why? Because if they paused for even a moment, silence would be deafening. Psychologists call this phenomenon learned helplessness. When faced with too many choices, or when the weight of autonomy feels unbearable, people retreat into passivity. They convince themselves they don't really have a choice. They're stuck, when in reality, they're simply paralyzed by the immensity of their own freedom. It's easier to pretend the cage is locked than to admit you've been holding the key all along, and here's the cruel twist. When you deny your freedom, you don't escape the burden, you just disguise it. You still feel the gnawing sense of emptiness. You still wrestle with the quiet panic that your life is not truly yours. But now, instead of confronting it, you bury it under layers of excuses, distractions, and borrowed identities. This is why entire industries exist to keep you numb. Endless entertainment, self-help quick fixes, fast food for the soul. They feed the void but never fill it. They give you the illusion of living while keeping you docile. You can stay in that state for years, even decades, until one day you wake up and realize your life has been on autopilot, your potential traded for comfort, your freedom squandered in the pursuit of safety. And if you think this is only an individual issue, look closer at the society you live in. When millions of people refuse to carry the burden of freedom, they become easy to control. They become predictable consumers, obedient workers, malleable citizens. Entire political and economic systems thrive on this. They don't want you to be free. They want you to think you're free while keeping you tethered to invisible strings you're too afraid to cut, because real autonomy would demand more of you than you're ready to give. This is how freedom becomes commodified. You're sold symbols of it: a new car, a luxury vacation, an upgraded phone, while your actual autonomy withers. You work jobs you hate to afford things you don't need just to maintain the illusion of independence. You post carefully curated fragments of your life online, hoping the performance convinces you and everyone else that you're living freely. But deep down, you know, these are chains made of gold, not wings. And here's where it gets darker. When you run from freedom, you don't just lose control over your external life. You become a stranger to yourself. You construct an identity out of what is expected of you, what is applauded by others, what feels safe. This false self can be so convincing that you forget who you really are. Carl Jung warned about this. The more you live through your persona, the more alienated you become from the true self. You live, but not as you. In time, this estrangement breeds quiet resentment. You start to envy those who seem to live authentically, even as you dismiss them as reckless or naive. You grow bitter toward the younger version of yourself who once dreamed of more. You might even project your dissatisfaction outward, blaming your partner, your boss, your parents, the government, anyone but the one person who has always held the power to change things. This is the unseen cost of avoiding freedom. It's not just that you live a smaller life. It's that you live a life that isn't truly yours, convincing yourself it is. And as this pattern compounds, the stakes grow higher. You become less willing to take risks, less open to change, less curious about the possibilities beyond your comfort zone. You shrink, you calcify, until one day you look in the mirror and realize that you've been existing. It's not living, that you've been surviving the weight of freedom rather than wielding it. And yet there's another layer to this tragedy. On some primal level, you know all of this. You may not articulate it, but you feel it. That dull, persistent ache in your chest. That's the unclaimed life within you. That's the self you've buried beneath roles, expectations, and distractions, crying out for expression. This is why Sartre, for all his bleakness, ultimately insisted that existence precedes essence. You are not born with a fixed purpose. You carve it out with your choices. Meaning is not discovered, is made. And yet, this is where so many falter. They confuse freedom with aimlessness. They equate choice with fulfillment. They try to fill the void with pleasure, distraction, or achievement, only to find the emptiness growing deeper. Why? Because freedom without meaning is despair. Viktor Frankl saw this in the death camps. Those who survived weren't always the strongest or the smartest, but the ones who had a why to live for. The burden of freedom can only be carried when you give it a purpose, a cause that transcends mere survival. This purpose doesn't have to be grand in the eyes of the world. It doesn't have to be celebrated or even understood by anyone else. It only has to be real for you. It might be raising a child with love in a world that feels increasingly cold. It might be devoting yourself to an art form no one else values. It might be dedicating your life to service, or to creation, or to the relentless pursuit of truth. The form doesn't matter. What matters is that you claim it, that you take ownership of the canvas and decide what will live upon it. And here's the beauty: once you choose your purpose, not the one you've been handed, but the one you forged, it transforms the burden of freedom into something else entirely. The nausea of infinite choice becomes the exhilaration of creative responsibility. The abyss you once feared becomes a wellspring of possibility. You are no longer crushed by the weight of what do I do with my life? You are animated by it. But there's one more layer, one final, breathtaking insight that changes everything. True freedom is not about you alone. This may sound paradoxical after everything we've said about autonomy, but it's the deepest truth of all. The philosophers and mystics across history have converged here, each in their own way. You cannot find meaning in pure self-indulgence. You cannot carry the burden of freedom if the only thing you serve is yourself. Nietzsche hinted at this when he spoke of giving style to one's character, not as a selfish act, but as an offering to existence itself. Frankl understood it when he said meaning is found in self-transcendence, when you give yourself to a cause or a person beyond your own survival. Even Schopenhauer, the great pessimist, believed that compassion stepping outside the prison of the self was one of the few true moral acts. To be truly free is to recognize that your life, your choices, your art, your work are not just for you. They ripple outward. They become a legacy. And suddenly, the canvas of your freedom expands. It's no longer confined to the narrow frame of personal fulfillment. It becomes a living, breathing testament to the fact that you existed and that your existence mattered. So, here is the ultimate realization. Freedom is not about living without chains. It's about deciding which chains are worth bearing. It's about choosing what you will serve, not blindly, not because someone told you to, but because you looked into the abyss, felt the full weight of your autonomy, and chose to bind yourself to something meaningful. That might be love. It might be truth. It might be creation. It might be the quiet, steadfast work of healing a broken world. But it must be yours. And once you make that choice, once you commit to it fully, something extraordinary happens. The burden that once felt unbearable becomes the very thing that gives your life its weight, its depth, its beauty. You no longer live as a ghost, drifting through someone else's script. You live as an author, pen in hand, fully awake to the miracle and tragedy of being alive. This is the final freedom, not the reckless doing of whatever you want, but the conscious, courageous act of deciding what your life will stand for. So, now the question is no longer, what do I do with my freedom? The question is, what will I create with it? Will you waste it, letting fear and distraction write your story for you? Or will you rise trembling but resolute, hand-carve meaning out of the void? The canvas is blank. The pen is in your hand. There will never be a greater rebellion than this, to look at the terrifying, boundless gift of your freedom and say, this is mine, and I will make it count.